Although the idea of what would become the slasher film began in Gothic literature and films of the 19th and early 20th century, it wasn't until the release of two extremely influential films in 1960 that the sub-genre began to define into what we recognise today. The first of these films was Peeping Tom, directed by Michael Powell, which follows a serial killer who records his murders using a portable camera. This prototype slasher puts the audience into the killer's perspective. Released later that year was Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, also featured a serial killer, but his film was more about a whodunit with multiple red herrings to obscure the killer's identity. Both of these films feature common slasher tropes, mentally disturbed killers using knives or other cutting tools as their main weapon and letting the viewers see through their eyes. In the 1960s and 70s, many films were produced by studios that used high levels of blood and gore, as well as explicit nudity, drugs use, and other sensational elements to extract an audience. Although most of these films wouldn't be regarded as slashers, as they focus on a higher level of realism than the more supernatural elements introduced by later films. One of the most prominent early exploitations films was Wes Craven's Last House on the Left, which told the story of a gang of murderers and rapists who are killed in various nasty ways by the parents of their last victim. The later film, 1974, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, helped to popularize the genre, partly due to the claim that this film was based on a real-life story. In reality, it was only very loosely based on the Ed Gein killing, as were several other films and books. Director Tobe Hooper successfully built on the legend to create a film that relied on just as much as what the audience didn't see as what it did. Black Xmas, also 1974, could be regarded as the first slasher film, featuring as it did a killer with an identity hidden, a stalking scene, and a murder of series of young victims. And John Carpenter's Halloween was the first film to introduce a masked, seemingly indestructible killer. Although again the film relies on much more continued build-up of suspense rather than the killings themselves, which are more unexpected than violent and bloody. In 1980, Friday the 13th joined the supernatural elements of Halloween with the violent serial killer format established in the earlier films and created a mainstream success that helped the 80s to become a decade for the slasher films. Through the 80s, the slasher films format began into a strict pattern, often centering around a holiday or another event, and the format was mixed with other genres to create slasher comedies and such variations. 1984's A Nightmare on Elm Street added supernatural and fantasy elements to the genre, helping to give it further audience interest. By now, sequels to many of the early and influential slashers have been released, and the building of slasher franchises developed, with the Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street franchises giving birth to the highest number of sequels. By the 1990s, the genre was past its best. It took director Wes Craven first his New Nightmare, and then with 1996 Scream to give the genre a new lease of life, introducing self-aware characters that recognise the themes of slashers within the films themselves. This introduced a more satirical element to later slashers, although many films were still updated, remakes of classic originals. In the 21st century, there is no sign of the slasher film going anyway anytime soon, as the genre constantly pulls in some of the highest audiences and therefore box office figures. Although it could be said that the genre is no longer as fresh and as inventive as it once was, there are still enough films being made that everyone keeps interest in.